it's important that we get certain notions right about why this works. And this is one of my favorite drawings from the book. And it's an engine that conveys the message that, you know, there's something that's powering the outcome. But inside the engine, in organics or in a biological system, it's not compost or chicken manure that you have there. It's all the microbial life that is fueling the system. And that is something that I think is really fundamental. All of this life, it is mineralizing the organic matter that you are putting into the soil. The more active these guys are, the more fertile and dynamic your soil is. So this is really important that we get that. It's not just putting compost or putting fertilizer. It's making sure that things are dynamic and it's turning and, you know, it's alive and active. So these are the things that you need to take care of. You know, the pH and the mineral balance. This is like the first kind of thing. Your agronomist should help you out in that way. You know, aeration and drainage. This is how permanent raised beds take care of that. Drainage. This is the reason why we raise the beds. We raise the beds because we want to have drainage of excess water, especially in the spring. Especially in my climate where there's snow melt. Aeration equals non-compaction. So making sure that the soil is loose. Well, by not working the soil and by not, you know, compacting it, you're kind of taking care of that. There's a bit more to it, and some of the tools that we use go about that, but still, it's kind of built in. And then organic matter, crop rotation, cover crops. This is, as a grower, this is what you're actively, this is your input into that system. So this is, you know, common sense, but we need to be thinking about this. This is our fertilization plan that we've been using on the farm for the first 6 years, if I remember right. And what it did is that it synchronized the needs of the plant with a fertility program that took into account also the weather pattern and the temperature of the soil. So let me explain this. If you're putting a lot of compost onto your bed and it's a cold spring, all of your crops, let's say you're growing broccolis, these broccolis, what they need is nitrogen to really get their leaf structure going. So they need nitrogen earlier on in their growth stage. Later on, when that canopy gets formed and then it can attract all the sunlight, the root system, they go in the soil and they get what they need from the compost and the nutrients that are there. However, if your soil is cold, your life forms are not happening and it's not mineralizing. So you can put as much compost as you want, it's not going to give out nitrogen. So that's why you need to have supplemental fertilizers like chicken manure or green sand or whatever, something that is more soluble. So we've been using a combination of both for the heavy feeders. And this is like, I'm not going to go in detail in all this, it's all laid out in the book, but these are the things that we need to be thinking about. So that's where conventional agriculture, it has something to teach us because they've kind of figured out what the needs of the plants are at different stage of their growth. And you need, as a grower, to synchronize the input to make sure that there's no shortage of nutrients, you know, through the whole process. So again, we've took this complexity and made a plan, an action plan of how to go about it that is really easy and simple to follow. Heavy feeders, 4 wheelbarrows of compost, 5 liters of chicken manure, and then we're sure it's going to work. Okay, so I encourage you to look into these things and not just like blindly fertilize, thinking that all is well in the best of world. You need to kind of push the envelope a bit more to have an educated guess about how to go about this. Or you follow a plan that works and then you modify and adjust according to what you see happening in the fields. So compost on our farm has been the main input from the start of the project. And not just compost, great compost or good compost. And there's a difference between compost, good compost, and manure. You know, a common thing that I see is people that are putting manure in their gardens or their market gardens, like this old pile of horse manure that the neighbor is giving to them, and thinking that you're doing something great for the soil. Well, you're not doing something bad, but manure that hasn't been composted and is not covered has been leached of all its nutrients, so you're only adding organic matter to the soil. And if it's not compost, then all the weed seeds that are present, you're importing them directly into your garden. So you're just like, you're creating a big mess for yourself. So compost, what it does is that it allows to burn off these weed seeds as the temperature rises when you're making the compost, but it also stabilizes the nutrients in the compost. So you can put it in the ground and, it's like it's a feedstock for the next 2 or 3 seasons. This can only be achieved if you're measuring the temperatures, if you're turning the compost pile at the right time, if the ingredients and the base is following a good recipe, if you're diligent about this all the way through, which I've never really learned how to do. So we've been buying compost ever since we started the farm. And that has been a big money-saving thing, a big lifesaver. We're sure we're adding compost that doesn't have any weed seeds, that comes with an NPK, and that comes delivered hot to the farm. So in the early spring, I can put hot compost into my beds. And so we put a lot of it. It comes to 80 tons per acre, which is 40 tons every year on half of the garden, following my rotation that I showed you earlier on. Okay? It's about, our cost was about $2,000 per year, which is really not a lot if you compare to how much gross profit, gross sales that we have on the acre and a half. So I'm not saying that you should not make your own compost and just buy it, but perhaps if you're starting out and you're already busy figuring out how to farm and how to market your stuff, and you're working out your data spreadsheets and your crop planning, and you're figuring out how seeders they operate, this is perhaps one element that you can just leave to others, compost geeks, and have a relationship with them when at least you're sure that you're adding something that is going to make your system work. So pictures of how we spread the compost on the farm. Again, the first few years I think we were doing 6 or 7 wheelbarrows per 100-foot bed. And that was a compost that was really high in organic matter content because it was peat moss based with cow manure, sheep manure, seaweeds, shrimps. It was a pretty good mixture, and we just put a lot of it because we had this idea of building up soil. Okay? So spreading compost onto the beds. I have a funny story about this, is that every year we have one intern, usually one intern that goes to me and says, JM, you're always talking about efficiency. Why don't we get a manure spreader? And then I'm like, oh, wow, I've never thought about that. Why don't we get a manure spreader? Why are we doing this with wheelbarrows? Silly me. And then I go with, okay, well, let's think this through. I'll get a manure spreader that is 4 feet center to center, which is the middle of the path from one to the other. They're hard to find, but I know I have friends. I'll have one. Okay, $2,000. It's gonna work. And then I'm gonna buy a tractor with a loader to really speed up the process. I'm not gonna buy it new because I haven't sold that many books. And I'm gonna get another tractor to make sure that it's efficient, that we're kind of hauling the manure spreader around. So I'll get all this equipment, it's fine, no problem. But you know what? When it's time to do the job, I bet you one of the tractor will not work. And I'll spend the day trying to fix the tractor or, run around trying to find the part that's not working. All of this when you can just be doing this faster and with focusing on how to do this. And this kind of way of thinking, we're always thinking that if we mechanize things, we'd be more efficient. But actually, perhaps not. Like in 2014, like the wheelbarrow and shovels are still appropriate technology. It's reliable, it works, and it's just about putting human power into it. Not saying the manure spreaders are not good, but for a setup like that, perhaps not. For greenhouses, for sure not. Another way to streamline that operation would be to hire my neighbor. He's 15-year-old. He's a hockey kid. He plays hockey like 5 times a week, and he eats like 10 people. And I could just hire him and just, try and measure his time and go, can you do this faster than 2 hours? And then he'll be excited and he'll work super fast. And then, it takes a day and you're done. So then we're making sure that we're not losing all the nitrogen of the compost by burying the first few inch of the soil with the harrow, and I'll talk about that later on. Always cover your compost pile. Super important, otherwise you're losing all of its nutrient power. Okay? And I was describing all the composting process and that you need to be diligent if you want to make something good. And I know this because every year I do something that is not good. Because I'm not following a program, I'm doing whatever, and I'm not measuring, and I'm not turning at the right time. And what I get every year is compost that is okay, but it's really not the same as the other one that I purchased. So again, if you're making compost, make sure that you're investing some of your time to get something really good, because it's your main input in the whole system. Okay? So this picture was taken 3 years ago. So that was about 9 years after the first beds that were dug. And it was great. It was when all these French agronomists started to come down, and I felt that I needed to kind of protect myself, so I hired an agronomist, so they had the same discussion, and I could go on and do my things. And we dug a soil profile, and it was crazy, like 12-inch of really, super nice brown soil. No layers. Not turning the soil. It's really powerful stuff. And that got us going in thinking about the earthworms. Earthworms, they're wonderful. And I think that we don't spend enough time thinking about how their input is of highest quality in our operation. Given the right conditions, these guys, night and day, they're going up and down, back and forth. Coming up, taking organic matter, bringing it down, pooping humus, creating all this soil structure. And if you're not turning your soil upside down, well, you're giving these guys a chance. And when I got excited about these, our goal really was, and it still is today, and I think we're starting to achieve some of this, was to replace mechanical tillage with biological tillage and harness the power of earthworms to do the job for us. And that is one reason why the broad fork is such an important tool in our toolbox, because it allows us deep tillage of the soil, but gentle tillage that doesn't overhaul the soil. So we're keeping its ecological structure, integrity. You're not bringing up weed seeds from the bottom up. So you're really loosening the soil, but in a very gentle way. So the earthworms, they're fine with that. There's no problem there. Except if you fork one, but that rarely happens. So broad forking on, an acre and a half. Again, veteran growers find this very hard to believe that this is efficient. They're like, okay, you're pushing it. But really, if you think about it, this is a very fundamental aspect to make sure that you have the right soil structure, to get the whole other, the whole other thing going. And once you get good soil going, broad forking gets to be really easy.